The check in my purse was worth $20,000. By the time I left that house, it was confetti, and I have never felt richer in my life. My name is Candelaria. I am 68 years old, and I built everything I have from nothing. From absolute, humiliating, suffocating nothing. When my husband Arturo walked out 30 years ago, he left me with 2 small children, a mountain of debt that wasn't even mine, and the kind of silence that settles into a house when a man decides he's done. I didn't collapse. I opened a hardware store. I carted 50-kilogram bags of cement when my employees didn't show up. I negotiated with bank collectors who spoke to me like I was stupid. I ate cold sandwiches standing at the counter at noon because closing the store for lunch was a luxury I couldn't afford. And slowly, year by year, callus by callus, I built something. People in my town know El Roble, the oak. The name wasn't accidental. I wanted something that couldn't be knocked down by the wind. I should have remembered that lesson before I walked into my daughter's house that Sunday. The outfit I wore that day was a linen set I had bought in Florence 15 years ago. I remember the afternoon exactly. The smell of espresso drifting from a cafe, the light, that particular Italian gold that makes everything look like a painting. I walked into a small boutique with my carefully counted savings, and the fabric felt like an angel's wing against my fingers. The cut was classic, generous, with mother-of-pearl buttons that caught the light without showing off. I had cared for that set the way some women care for jewelry, hand-washed, pressed with light starch, stored with sachets of lavender. To anyone with eyes and taste, it was beautiful. To me, it was a symbol. It was the first time in my adult life I had traveled alone, spent money on myself without asking permission, and felt like a complete human being rather than someone's wife, someone's mother, or someone's problem to solve. I touched those buttons as I rang the doorbell of my daughter Mariana's house. I was early. The check was in my purse, sealed in a white envelope. I had decided to give it to her that day. The proceeds from the sale of a piece of land I had been saving for my old age, for medical emergencies, for the quiet dignity of not being a burden to anyone. But Mariana had sounded so exhausted on the phone lately. The roof was leaking. The kitchen ceiling had water stains the shape of continents. Her husband Gustavo, an architect who talked about buildings he never actually finished, had promised to fix things for 3 years running. I had decided to step in. $20,000, enough for a real renovation, enough for my daughter to stop waking up with a bucket in her hand every time it rained. I rang the bell with my heart full of generosity. The door opened and the noise hit me like a wall. It wasn't an intimate family lunch. It was a party. Music too loud for the afternoon, the thick smell of grilling meat and whiskey, and a living room full of men in their 40s wearing brand-name t-shirts 2 sizes too tight, laughing at each other's jokes with the desperation of people who need witnesses to their own success. Gustavo appeared through the crowd, glass in hand, eyes already glazed by midday drinking. "The mother-in-law is here," he announced, not to me but to the room, in the tone of a circus ringmaster presenting a curious exhibit. I smiled. I know how to smile at difficult suppliers. I know how to walk into a room full of skeptics and hold my ground. I crossed the threshold and looked for Mariana, but she was in the kitchen, managing the food that all these uninvited mouths were about to eat. I said good afternoon to the room. A brief silence fell, the particular silence that precedes either weather or stupidity. A bald man with sunglasses on indoors looked me up and down with the slow, contemptuous satisfaction of someone who has never been corrected in his life. "Gustavo," he said, loud enough for everyone, "didn't you say a relic was coming for lunch?" He laughed. A dry, practiced laugh. The kind that expects company and always finds it. The stab in my stomach was quick and sharp. But I have handled worse. I stood still, kept the smile, looked for my daughter. And then Gustavo, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, the man whose university debt I had quietly helped clear 5 years ago, put his arm around my shoulder. Not warmly. Theatrically. The way you present something odd and old at a market stall. He stepped back, swept his arm toward me like a magician, and said to his friends with his words slightly slurred, "Don't pay attention to her. My mother-in-law is from another era. Look at her." He pointed, actually pointed at my linen. At my Florence linen with its mother-of-pearl buttons. Candelaria, my God, didn't you have anything better in the closet? That rag is done. It looks like something we use to dry the dog after rain. Time stopped. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean that the room actually slowed down, the way it does in moments of real shock, when the mind needs extra seconds to process something it wasn't prepared for. I looked at Gustavo's eyes. I waited for the flicker of remorse, the telltale tightening that means someone knows they've gone too far. There was nothing. Only arrogance. The flat, comfortable arrogance of a man who has never once faced a real consequence. Looks like a faded potato sack, added another of his friends, energized by the host's permission. The laughter that followed was loud and genuine, and it bounced off the walls of the room that I was about to pay to renovate. I pressed the strap of my purse until my knuckles went white. Inside that purse was $20,000. In my hand, metaphorically, was a lifeline for people who were calling me a floor rag to entertain their friends. I needed Mariana. I turned and found her at last, coming out of the kitchen with a tray of appetizers. She had heard the laughter. She saw her husband pointing at me. She saw her friends bent over with it. Our eyes met. In that second I sent her everything. Help me, defend me, say something, say anything. She set the tray down on the coffee table. She looked at her husband. She looked back at me with a small, apologetic, cowardly smile. "Mama," she murmured, "you do look a little old-fashioned." Said softly. Said carefully. Said to smooth the air between her husband and his audience, using my dignity as the currency. That was the real blow. Not Gustavo, not the bald man with his indoor sunglasses. My daughter. The girl whose scraped knees I had cleaned. Whose university fees I had paid working 12-hour days. Whose wedding I had funded by selling the only jewelry I owned from my own mother. She threw me to them to keep the peace. She sacrificed me on the altar of her husband's entertainment. I said I needed the bathroom. My voice came out perfectly flat. No tremor, no cracking, not because I wasn't devastated, but because I have cried alone in stockrooms at 4 in the morning when the accounts didn't balance and I couldn't let my employees see. I know how to hold it. Down the hall on the right, Gustavo called after me. Don't confuse it with the service room. More laughter. I walked to the guest bedroom instead. The room where I slept when I stayed to help with the grandchildren, when Mariana was sick, when Gustavo disappeared for days on his so-called professional trips. I closed the door and put the lock across. The noise of the party became a distant hum, like something happening underwater. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. I looked at myself. I looked at the wrinkles that mapped every hard year, every negotiation, every night I lay awake calculating whether I could make payroll. I looked at my gray hair, neat and dignified. I looked at my linen, at the fabric that had traveled with me to Florence, that I had pressed and preserved and respected for 15 years. I reached out and touched the sleeve. It was cool and soft. Noble. It held its shape the way things do when they are made properly, when someone put care into the construction. Looks like something to dry the dog. The phrase tried to take root in me, and I felt the burn of tears somewhere behind my eyes. I did not let them come. I was not going to cry for a man who couldn't tell linen from burlap. I was not going to cry for a daughter who had chosen her husband's laughter over her mother's dignity. I opened my purse. My hands, which had loaded crates of paint and boxes of bolts for 3 decades, were completely steady. I took out the white envelope. I opened it carefully, without tearing the paper. The check was inside, $20,000, my signature clear and firm, the numbers generous enough to change their lives. I held it and looked at my reflection. They saw a floor rag. I saw dignity. They saw an old woman they could humiliate to amuse a room full of nobodies. I saw the woman who had the power to save them or to bury them. And for the first time in years, I understood that those were not the same thing. The sadness, that first clean punch to the chest, began to change shape. It cooled. It hardened. It became something precise and heavy as a steel bolt. For years I had been the understanding mother, the quiet mother-in-law, the invisible provider who filled the gaps that Gustavo's incompetence and arrogance created. I had told myself that love was the mortar holding this family together. That my money was love made practical. That if I gave enough, eventually respect would follow. I had been catastrophically wrong. Respect is not a purchase. Gratitude is not a reflex. And generosity shown to people without character is not kindness. It is fuel for their contempt. I ran my thumb along the printed numbers on the check. 20,000. Floor rag. A thin smile moved across my lips, almost invisible, but real. I was not going to leave weeping. I was not going to go home and spend the night on the phone to my sister describing how cruel they had been. That is what a broken woman does. Candelaria was not broken. Candelaria had simply been sleeping, and someone had just made the catastrophic mistake of slapping her awake. I retouched my lipstick in the mirror. Deep red. The color I wore to difficult meetings. I smoothed my linen jacket. And I walked back out into the fire. The party had not missed me. Gustavo was holding court by the grill, waving a long-handled fork like a scepter, talking about politics or football with the absolute authority of a man who has never been seriously challenged. His friends nodded and laughed in that obedient way that people do when they're waiting for someone to refill their glass. Mariana was running back and forth with napkins and plates, bent under the invisible weight of a woman trying to please everyone except herself. "She's back," called the bald man. He raised his cup in a mocking toast. "We thought you'd gone to knit, Dona." Gustavo laughed his broken glass laugh. "My mother-in-law is made of iron, even if she dresses in burlap." He winked at me with the bold carelessness of a man who believes he has already won. I sat in the worn armchair they had assigned to me. I accepted the paper plate someone put in front of me, the meat charred black on the outside and raw in the center, a perfect metaphor for their life. Scorched surface, bloody interior. I didn't eat. I observed. And then I began to work. "Gustavo," I said, waiting for a gap in his monologue. "Tell me more about the renovation. If I'm going to contribute, I'd like to understand the details." The mention of money was a switch. His posture changed instantly, shoulders back, chin up, the fork put down. He crossed the room toward me with the slick energy of a man who smells opportunity. He described his vision: knock down the kitchen wall, open concept, black granite island, industrial steel appliances, fix the leaking roof. It sounded rehearsed. It had been rehearsed. For me. "Budget?" I asked pleasantly, turning a piece of charred meat on my plate. "Materials have gone up, as you know," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Wood, cement, everything's through the roof. We're looking at about 25,000, but with the 20 you're going to advance us, we can start the heavy work. Finance the rest." Mariana drifted closer, hands drying on a kitchen cloth. She looked at me with eyes that begged, "Don't ask hard questions. Just give them the money and let the afternoon stay peaceful." That look cost her more than she knew. "Interesting," I said. "Do you have the plans? I'd love to see the vision." Gustavo resisted. "It was Sunday, no bureaucracy, trust me, I'm the professional here." But I held my mild, pleasant expression and said I simply liked to see the scope. He went to a cluttered cabinet and pulled out a wrinkled notebook. He spread it open on the coffee table, pushing aside empty beer bottles. I leaned forward. And that was when a loose paper slipped from between the pages, a printed budget from a building materials supplier, and slid toward me across the table. I took it before he could. "That's old," he said. "Immediately. Too immediately." My eyes moved down the list. I have spent 30 years knowing the price of every material in a 100-kilometer radius. I know what a square meter of porcelain tile costs. I know what cement sells for this month, last month, and the month before. These prices were not old. They were inflated, tripled in some cases. And at the bottom of the list, below the kitchen items, below the roof repair estimates, were line items that had nothing to do with any renovation. surround sound audio system, climate-controlled wine cellar, outdoor jacuzzi. I raised my eyes. Gustavo was watching me with a look I recognized from the supply chain meetings I used to run. The look of someone who has been caught but hasn't yet decided whether to brazen it out or retreat. A jacuzzi, I said, conversationally, gently, for the leaking roof. A silence fell that was different from the others. The friends stopped talking. Mariana went pale as chalk. It's part of an integrated project, Mama, she said, her voice barely above a breath. To increase the property value. Gustavo says if you invest in premium. Of course, Gustavo said, recovering his composure with the speed of long practice. Property market demands it. You have to think big, Candelaria. With your hardware store mentality, sometimes the complete picture is hard to see. Hardware store mentality. He said it like a diagnosis. Like running an honest business and understanding numbers was a deficiency, a symptom of limited imagination. In that moment, something engaged inside me that I hadn't felt in years. A gear long rusted by guilt and the desire to be loved, suddenly freed, suddenly turning with terrifying precision. I remembered exactly who I was. I was the woman who had negotiated debts with banks when Arturo left us in ruins. I was the woman who had cried in the bathroom of her own store so her employees wouldn't see, then walked back out and closed the deal. I was the woman who had built something real from actual nothing, not from someone else's money. And this man, this parasite in a brand name shirt who had never once lifted a bag of cement in his manicured life, was sitting in a room he couldn't pay for, mocking my intelligence while reaching for my savings. You're right, I said. And I let my voice go sweet and soft, the way I do when I'm about to close a deal that the other person doesn't know is already closed. Sometimes I miss the bigger picture. Perhaps this old cloth doesn't let me think with modern clarity. Gustavo relaxed visibly. His shoulders dropped. He thought he'd won. He thought the magic word, money, had subdued me. Exactly, he said warmly. We'll modernize you. Just needs to be explained slowly. He winked at his friend with that conspiratorial ease of men who think women operate on a 30-second delay. I excused myself for water. I went to the kitchen. I stood at the counter in the noise and chaos of Gustavo's party. Dirty plates everywhere, the smell of burnt fat and spilled beer. And there, next to his car keys on the countertop, a travel brochure. Cancun. All-inclusive, 5 stars, departure date. Next Friday. I stared at it. The brochure was open and a price was circled in red pen. One of those automatic gestures people make when they're excited, when they're planning, when they're imagining themselves somewhere else. Somewhere warm and expensive and far away from leaking roofs and demanding mothers-in-law. The cold that moved through me had nothing to do with temperature. There was no renovation. Or if there was, it was a footnote, a minimum gesture to give the lie some structure. My $20,000, my retirement fund, my dignity in old age, my buffer against the day my knees finally gave out, was going to pay for a holiday. My son-in-law's holiday. My grandchildren would splash in a 5-star pool while the same ceiling that needed fixing continued to rot above their beds. And the woman who'd humiliated me in front of his friends would send photographs from a beach while I sat in my apartment thinking I had helped someone I loved. I took the brochure and put it in my jacket pocket. I went back to the party. I sat down in my assigned armchair. I felt different now. Heavier and at the same time more solid, like the bones in my body had calcified into something stronger than bone. More like iron. More like the name on my store. Gustavo came toward me with his hand already out. His eyes fixed on my purse with the focused hunger of a dog that has learned which pocket holds the treats. Well, Candelaria, what do you say we close the deal? I can transfer the money to the supplier first thing tomorrow before the prices go up any further. I looked at his hand. Smooth, manicured, soft. The hands of a man who designs things he never builds and pays for things he never earns. Of course, I said. But first, I'd like to say a few words. Since your friends are here. Witnesses to this family moment. His eyes lit up with greed. The floor is yours, Candelaria. The friends fell quiet. Even the music seemed to lower without anyone touching it. They expected the old woman's speech. A few sentimental sentences, maybe some tears, and then the check. They had no idea. For years, I began, I have been quiet. I was the mother who said yes. The mother-in-law who swallowed her opinions with her coffee. The woman who believed that if she gave enough, eventually the people she loved would learn to respect her. I paused. Let the words settle. I thought that was love. I thought it was what family meant. To reduce yourself. To make yourself small and useful and available. To not cause trouble. The room was very still. But while I was sitting in your guest room just now, I realized something. I reached into my purse. The white envelope was in my hand. I didn't take out the check yet. The power wasn't in the money. The power was in the exact moment of choosing to stop being the victim. A bent nail doesn't straighten itself, I said. In the hardware business, when something's warped, you pull it out and throw it away. You don't keep hammering it and hoping. Gustavo's smile was beginning to cool at the edges. He didn't know why yet, but his body understood something had shifted. What are you talking about, Candelaria? Oh, nothing important, I said pleasantly. Just the thoughts of an old woman. Get me a glass of water, would you? My throat is dry from laughing so much. While he turned to get it, I reached into my jacket pocket and placed the Cancun brochure face down on my lap, beneath the envelope. Everything was in position. The trap was complete. They had walked into it with their eyes wide open, blinded by their own appetite. Gustavo came back with a glass, ice clinking urgently against the sides. Even the ice betrayed his nervousness. He handed it over without meeting my eyes, his gaze tracking the envelope on my lap like a compass needle finding north. I drank slowly, deliberately, setting the rhythm of what came next. Thank you, I said, dabbing the corners of my lips with the care of a woman in no hurry whatsoever. The heat makes me dizzy. Must be the age. He gave a tight laugh. As soon as we get that central air conditioning installed with the renovation, you'll be cool as a cucumber every time you visit. I looked up. The air conditioning wasn't in the plans. It wasn't in the budget. But I let him keep talking, because in business, if you give a dishonest client enough rope, they construct their own noose without any help from you. Gustavo, I said, cutting through his vision of the future with my quietest voice. There's one thing I noticed in that budget. The jacuzzi. He tensed. And you mentioned a gas leak. In the kitchen. I paused. Let the words connect themselves in the room. Hydrojet and a gas leak sounds like an interesting combination. The friends looked at each other. The bald man took off his sunglasses for the first time. They're separate issues, Gustavo said, his confidence fraying at the edges. Technical things. You wouldn't understand the details. Technical things, I repeated. Like the Cancun trip? I said it quietly. Almost gently. The way you announce checkmate. The color left Gustavo's face so fast it looked physical, like something being drained. Mariana made a small strangled sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. I reached into my pocket and placed the brochure on the coffee table beside the envelope. The white beach, the blue ocean, the circled price. 5 stars. All inclusive. Next Friday. The silence in that room was the most complete silence I have ever heard. Candelaria. What? Gustavo started. Cancun. I said again louder. For the friends. For the witnesses he had specifically wanted present for this transaction. 5-star hotel. Departure this Friday. Circled in red. In your kitchen. Next to your car keys. I stood up slowly. I am not a tall woman, but I have presence. 30 years of running a business that nobody expected me to run gives a woman a particular way of filling a room. I'd like to show everyone something, I said. I reached into the envelope and took out the check. I held it up between two fingers so they could all see it clearly. $20,000, I said. Clean money. Work money. The money from a piece of land that I spent 10 years cleaning legally of the debts your predecessor left on it, Gustavo. The money I was going to invest in your future while you planned a vacation using my goodwill as the down payment. Gustavo erupted. You went through my things. That's an invasion of privacy. You had no right. And you had no right to call me a floor rag, I said. Still calm. Still even. You had no right to mock me in front of these men. Affectionate. It was a warning signal, a pressure, the grip of a man who had learned to use his wife as a buffer between himself and consequences. Tell your mother, he said softly, in that honeyed voice that made my skin crawl. Tell her how happy we're going to be. Mariana swallowed. Her eyes were filling with tears she was fighting to contain. Yes, Mama, she said, and her voice came out barely above a breath. We need it. The house. The leaks. There's a gas problem. It scares me at night. She manufactured a gas leak to speed the extraction. She looked at the floor when she said it. Something cold and final closed in my chest. I had raised a girl with fire in her. Somewhere along the line, this man had replaced the fire with fear, and she had let him, and I had helped him do it by always arriving with money to smooth everything over, to cover his failures before she had to face them, to rescue her from consequences that might have rescued her from him years ago. I understand, I said. And my voice broke, not from weakness, but from the particular grief of a mother who sees clearly and cannot look away. I stood up straight. I lifted the check in both hands. And I tore it. The sound that the paper made, one clean, catastrophic rip, was louder than any shout in that room. Gustavo lunged forward with a sound that wasn't a word. He sounded like a man falling. I tore the halves again. And again. And again. $20,000 became a small snowfall of blue confetti that I let drift from my hands onto the Cancun brochure with its perfect beach and its circled price. There's your renovation, I said. And there's your vacation. I dusted my palms together. I picked up my purse. My linen jacket fell perfectly back into place as I straightened. I turned toward the door. Crazy old woman. Gustavo's voice broke behind me, raw with the panic of a man watching his scaffolding collapse. You'll regret this. You'll die alone. I stopped at the threshold. I didn't turn around. I said it to the door, to the street, to the air. Better alone than in bad company. Better alone than badly dressed in someone else's dignity. And I walked out into the afternoon sun. He followed me. Of course he did. I heard the door crash open behind me and his heavy, graceless footsteps. The footsteps of a man made clumsy by alcohol and desperation. I turned before he reached me because I was not going to be approached from behind. He stopped a meter away, chest heaving, neck veins visible, all the manufactured charm burned away to reveal exactly what was underneath. Nothing. Just fear and appetite dressed up in brand names. Behind him in the doorway, Mariana stood hugging herself, small and erased. The friends hung back like spectators at an accident, no longer laughing. He raged. He accused me of humiliating him in his own house. He said the money was owed, that Mariana had rights, that I had promised. And then, because he had no other weapons left, he pointed at my linen one more time. Look at how she dresses, he said to the friends, to the neighbors who were beginning to appear at windows. The great hardware empress thinks she's better than everyone because she has some savings. Look at that rag. She looks like a beggar in disguise. You're pathetic, Candelaria. I took one step toward him. Just one. But it was enough. He stepped back. Gustavo, I said very quietly, you can insult my clothes as much as you want. You can call me old, outdated, a floor rag. But you made one very specific mistake in your calculations. What? He said. His chin was trembling. You forgot who co-signed your loans. What happened to his face in that moment was not something I will ever forget. The color simply left. Not faded, departed. As if his body understood before his mind did what was coming. Over the past 5 years, every time Gustavo had a business idea he couldn't fund, every time he wanted a vehicle he couldn't afford, he had come to me with the same phrase. "It's just a formality, Candelaria, just sign here." And I, the loving mother-in-law, the woman who believed love was built in layers of small sacrifices, had signed. His truck. His personal credit line. The business card he used to impress clients that was backed entirely by my financial record. My name, my clean credit history, my decades of honest dealings with the bank. All of it standing between Gustavo and his debts like a wall. A wall he had just finished insulting. "No," he whispered. And for the first time all afternoon, there was nothing performed about his voice. It was just a man, reduced to a single syllable of genuine terror. "You wouldn't." "Monday morning," I said, 8 o'clock. "I will be at the door of the central bank and the finance company when they open. I am going to revoke every guarantee I hold for your debts. Every single one. They'll execute the loans in 24 hours, he breathed. They'll take the truck. They'll freeze the accounts. I have no liquidity. That sounds like a structural problem, I said. Something a skilled architect should have anticipated. He dropped to his knees. On the public sidewalk, in front of his friends and his neighbors, the man who had pointed at my linen and called it a dog towel was on the ground. He grabbed my hand. He tried to kiss it. He said he was drunk, it was a joke. He swore my outfit was beautiful, it was Italian, he knew, it was elegant, it was classic. Please don't destroy him. His tears were hitting my shoes. Get up, I said. You're getting my floor rag dirty. I looked at the friends. The bald man had both hands in his pockets and was staring at the pavement. No chists now. No toasts. The great benefactor was on his knees on a public sidewalk and not one of them moved to help him. Loyalty among cowards lasts exactly as long as the party. And one more thing, I said. I was almost at the waiting taxi, a car that had appeared at the curb with the quiet rightness of good timing. The Roble hardware store is closing your account. From today, if you need a single nail, you pay cash. No family discount. No account. No credit. I opened the car door. The driver, a man my age with a kind face, got out and held it for me. What a beautiful outfit, Senora, he said, looking at my linen with simple, genuine admiration. I stopped. I looked at my sleeve. The fabric was exactly what it had always been. Noble. Durable. Made to last. Thank you, I said. And I meant it completely. It's old. But it holds up against everything. Even human stupidity. I got into the car and closed the door. While the air conditioning settled around me, I took out my phone. I called my lawyer, Roberto. It was Sunday, but he owed me several favors accumulated over many years of sending him clients. He picked up on the second ring. Candelaria? Is something wrong? On the contrary, I said, watching through the rear window as Gustavo argued with his friends, who were visibly preparing to leave. On the steps of the house, Mariana sat alone, head in her hands. It hurt. Of course it hurt. She was my blood. But I had spent 20 years cushioning her from the consequences of her choices, and every cushion I provided had made her less capable of landing on her own 2 feet. I need you to prepare the paperwork to revoke a commercial guarantee, I said. And I need a formal letter drafted to a Gustavo Mendez. Candelaria, Roberto said carefully, that's going to hit them very hard. I know, I said. But sometimes, Roberto, you have to demolish before you can build something real. Today I started the demolition. I hung up. I closed my eyes for one breath. The taxi smelled of old leather and my own perfume, lavender and something harder underneath, something like determination. The battle had been won. But the most important thing wasn't watching Gustavo fall. It was what I saw when I looked in the driver's rearview mirror. I didn't see a sad old woman in outdated clothes. I saw a general who had just won a war without firing a single shot, armed with nothing but her dignity and a linen jacket from Florence that had outlasted everything thrown at it. The consequences came the way good architecture falls, completely and without warning. By Tuesday, the bank had been notified. By Thursday, the truck was gone, towed from Gustavo's driveway in front of the same neighbors who had attended his parties and eaten his burnt meat. I was told he came out in his bathrobe to argue with the repossession officers, which told me everything I needed to know about the man. Constructora Elite, his phantom supplier of European imported materials, dissolved like sugar in rain. The friends who had laughed at my linen turned out to have no particular interest in co-signing for his debts, which surprised no one who has ever observed how quickly borrowed courage evaporates when the bill arrives. Mariana's silence lasted 3 weeks. 21 days in which my instinct to call, to appear at her door with food, to soften everything, screamed at me from the inside. I tied my hands behind my back, metaphorically. I knew that if I arrived with a rescue, I would teach her nothing. Pain is a brutal teacher, but it is the only one that doesn't lie. She came to the store on a rainy afternoon. No perfect makeup. No brand names. Jeans and a sweater that was too big for her, dark circles, hair pulled back in a rough ponytail. She looked exhausted and real and more herself than she had in years. She walked to the counter, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the floor. Gustavo left, she said. No preamble. He went to his mother's. Said I didn't support him. Said you destroyed us. I nodded. He took the television and the gaming console. Left me the utility bills and the mortgage arrears. She met my eyes. And this time there was no manipulation in her face, no strategic tears, no performance. Just a woman at the end of the road she had chosen, finally looking up to see where it had brought her. Mama, I'm not here to ask for money. I know you won't give it to me. You're right not to. She paused. I'm here to ask for work. The words hung in the air between us, solid and earned. The hardware store was dirty and beneath us, she continued, and her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it for years. Something like honesty. That's what Gustavo always said. But the hardware store paid for my education, my food, my clothes. And right now I need to eat. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her hands, soft, uncalloused, unacquainted with weight. I looked at her eyes and I saw in them, underneath the exhaustion and the shame, the same spark I recognized from 30 years ago when I was standing in my first empty store telling myself it was possible. Shift starts at 7, I said. Professional. Level. No exceptions for being my daughter. The salary is standard. If Ramirez tells you to sweep the stockroom, you sweep it. And here you are not the owner's daughter. You are the new employee. Understood. Mariana straightened her spine. A shadow of something fierce moved across her face. Understood, she said. Boss. She learned the work from the floor up. I watched her arrive each morning. I watched her carry boxes without complaining. I watched her negotiate with difficult clients and check herself when she wanted to take shortcuts. Her hands grew new calluses, honest ones. Gustavo circled twice with flowers and soft words. She didn't open the door. He who doesn't work doesn't eat, I heard her tell him on the phone before she blocked his number permanently. The house was saved not by my check but by a payment plan Mariana negotiated herself, using her own salary as collateral. I co-signed that one. But this time I was backing a worker, not a parasite. 6 months after the afternoon of the torn check, I went back to Italy. First class. Hotel with a view of the Arno. I walked the same streets I had walked 15 years before, when I had counted my savings and felt free for the first time in my adult life. I found the same boutique. The owner, a white-haired woman with the posture of someone who has never apologized for taking up space, looked at me as I entered and said simply, "You have magnificent bearing, signora." I bought a silk dress in terracotta and a new linen jacket, finer than the first. I bought a second jacket for Mariana, not as a bailout, but as a bonus for her promotion to sales manager. My last evening in Florence, I ate alone on a terrace under the stars and ordered the best wine on the list. I raised my glass to no one in particular, to the empty chair across from me, to the city lights, to the woman I had been afraid I'd lost somewhere in 30 years of being useful to everyone else. And I thought of Gustavo. And his friends. And the laughter that had bounced off those damp walls. And I felt, to my surprise, something close to gratitude. If they hadn't been so perfectly, carelessly cruel that afternoon, I would have handed over my $20,000 and gone home feeling generous. I would have kept being the cashier of their lives for another decade. Their contempt was the spark that lit the fire. They reminded me who I was. I am Candelaria. I am 68 years old. My real life, the life that belongs entirely to me, began the afternoon I tore a check into confetti and left it on a Cancun brochure. To every woman reading this who has felt herself becoming invisible. To every woman who has watched her opinion matter less and less the older she gets. To every woman who has been told her clothes are old, her ideas are obsolete, her money is a family obligation, hear me. Our old cloth is made of a fabric they cannot buy. It is called experience. Our savings are the fruit of battles they would never dare fight. And our dignity is not a floor rag for anyone to wipe their feet on before walking into our house to take what we built. The respect you keep trying to purchase, stop buying it. It is not for sale. It is taken. It is demanded. It is imposed by a woman who knows her own worth and has stopped offering discounts. Sometimes you have to tear the check. Let everything fall. Let the noise be enormous. And then stand in the wreckage in your best outfit and wait to see what survives. What survives is real. What collapses was never worth saving. I am not old. I am classic. And classic, as anyone who knows fabric will tell you, never goes out of style. But you are last season. And the season is over.